Hey, Chirag.
Hey, Sune, how's it going?
All right, man.
So, we got something for our audience today. Imagine four billionaire tech gods in a mountaintop retreat while the world burns. A beautiful backdrop, a lot of buzzwords, and a generous dose of self justification. Welcome to Mountainhead, where the view is clear, but everything else is a fog of ego and delusion. So, what did you think of Mountainhead?
I mean, that's a hell of a hook, bud. But I was so amped for this movie and had really high expectations given that it was Jesse Armstrong and how awesome Succession was. And the storyline, the content was definitely interesting. I felt the movie was underwhelming overall. I thought the dialogue, the prose left a lot to be desired. The character development seemed a bit shallow. It seemed like they were building on a pace for like a series for like multiple 1 hour episodes, and they somehow had to shrink it all into like a couple hours, and it just left a lot more for me to desire than what I got from it. But certainly a lot of interesting topics to talk through and a lot of conversational starters for sure. Like a lot of cool things to talk through. So that was my take. What'd you think?
Yeah, no, I kind of agree with you on that one. Obviously, fantastic cast, really well made, and just production quality, all that stuff. I mean, as you expect from watching Succession, it's pretty much the same team that put that together. But yeah, it was very lightly sketched, I would say, the characterizations, the plot, and yeah, I think it would have been better served as like a limited series almost, like a 4 episode stretch of, stretching it out to 4 episodes. I think it would have been much better. But yeah, it does bring up a lot of interesting topics, and I think right up our alley in terms of what we usually talk about and the topics that it or the thoughts it brings up when you're watching it.
No question about it. Definitely was excited to put and talk to you about this and share it with the audience on the pod. And I don't know, one of the scenes that really stuck out to me of like just embodying what these tech billionaires that I mean, let's be honest, like I thought they were essentially some, mix of probably Musk, maybe a little bit of Bezos. You might get some Zuck in there, and probably some Sam Altman, and all kind of thrown and mixed together in a blender, and then just like created into different molds of the characters that were in this movie, and what game they're really playing and how important their net worth is, and that really at the end of the day that seemed to be what they each were measuring their success off of their net worth. And there's this really memorable scene that they take those snowmobiles to like the top of the mountain and unzip their jackets and start writing their net worth on their chest, and they hand out awards for who has the highest net worth, and then the second highest, and the third highest, and then the last person with the smallest net worth gets like a soup ladle because they belong working at a soup kitchen, to make some like joke of how what their level of wealth is relative to the others. And it was like obviously super gross from my perspective, but like very telling on the mindset of what it takes to get to that level, and maybe at least in the examples for the movie what could be representative the mindset of the billionaires and the rich elite of Silicon Valley that are really at the heart of building our AI, you know, uh, capabilities as a country. Anyway, that was
Yeah,
one scene that I couldn't help but like just keep going back to as like, well, that this is really a good way to characterize what is important to these people.
yeah, no, it was really striking scene, obviously because of the setting. Yeah, just what it implies, right? There's even a follow up scene later on where the Jeff character, his net worth, Steve Carell's character, and there's this really weird dynamic between all the characters. They're kind of pissed at each other, but they're pretending they're not, and let's pop some champagne. It was just really interesting. It was really, I thought that scene was particularly well done.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. And like they did definitely create that tension of like, yeah, your net worth is more than mine, but I'm not really happy about it. But I know I have to celebrate, so I'll put on a good face.
Exactly, exactly.
How about you, man? What struck out to you?
Yeah, so it's interesting because I'm currently reading Reid Hoffman's latest book, which is Super Agency. And for those of you who might be familiar with Reid Hoffman, he's a very optimistic. He has a very optimistic personality in terms of technology in general, but very specifically AI as well. He's written a lot on the topic. He's spoken a lot on the topic. Obviously, I think these characters are like a heightened version of that, right? Like these tech bros who are very high on technology and very high on AI and what it can do in the world and really the power it gives them. I think Reid Hoffman is a little bit different. I read his motivations as very like altruistic, which could be naive of me, who knows? But and I veer more towards optimism anyway. But yeah, I know. But I think this what this movie is trying to do is heighten that sense of tech bro optimism and take it to its kind of ridiculous conclusion. But it's clear that the movie has a viewpoint that's the opposite of that. That's pessimistic towards AI, and we can kind of get more into that a little bit later. But I think, in particular, Steve Carell's character is the most interesting because he uses a lot of justifications for their actions, right? For everything they do. I know one line that stuck out to me is so just to set the stage, they're at this beautiful mountaintop resort, and meanwhile, outside in the rest of the world, there's complete chaos because of a tech product, I think similar to like Facebook. I think it was called Tram or something like that, of one of the other characters. So there's a lot of justification of, hey, these things like this happen. During the Super Bowl, there'll be 8 to 10 cardiac arrests and people will die. So they use that as almost justification for, hey, if you want to make progress, this is kind of, you gotta, crack some eggs, right? Like that. That's the kind of very kind of cavalier, throwaway mentality. And so I thought that was the most interesting. I mean, what did you think of Steve Carell's character?
I thought his character brought a very different angle for like a motivating driver for the development and or the acceleration of artificial intelligence relative to, I guess, the friction of development that something like morality, ethics, and like the safe and responsible development in AI would should be introduced in to make sure we don't, like do anything really harmful to ourselves or our civilization. And I thought, you had two kind of members of the foursome that were on opposite sides. One that was, hey, we should be safe, responsible, moral, ethical, and the character Jeff. And then the other character, Vin, he was the aggressor and like, let it all burn to hell. Like, it doesn't matter. This is inevitable. It's our fate. Like, we have to build this. We have to keep going. It doesn't matter what the consequences are. And I thought Steve Carell's character kind of stood in the middle because he was the eldest of the group, the wisest, and I think both Jeff and Vin were looking at Steve Carell's character to make the tie-breaking decision of which way this should go. And in the movie, they talk about Steve Carell's character having a incurable cancer, and the best doctor in the world says, "Yeah, there's nothing you can do." And Steve Carell's like absolute defiance that like, doctor, you don't know anything, and just leaves the doctor like stranded at an airport with no ride home, like just very like dismissive and like, this guy doesn't know anything and he's useless to me. And he basically latches on to Vin as like, hey, this is the ticket. If we develop this technology, how quickly can we get to the point where we can introduce robotics and be able to do like, cyborg type development. And they said it would be 10 years, but I need it in 5. And if you accelerate and don't put guardrails, you can get it in 5 years. So Steve Carell essentially like went all in on Vin's side and said like, hey, yeah, we gotta develop this quickly no matter what. And like, so what if there's like international world war, like we have to keep going, and that's a small price to pay for the development of something that could save my life. Basically, it was the way I read it. So I thought it was very narcissistic, selfish, and like, a very like plausible, credible rationale for the acceleration of development without having to pay attention to guardrails.
Yeah, so true. I guess you can kind of justify anything, right? When it's your life on the line, and I think he does. He clearly does. I don't want to give too many spoilers for people who haven't watched it, but obviously they take it to kind of almost comical extremes in trying to get Jeff character's product sold to Ven's character. So yeah, it brings up interesting moral dilemmas and questions about self-sacrifice and whether anything's justifiable if your life is on the line.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. That's right. And I mean, they definitely played around with all of that in the movie, and I thought, they even introduced some, stuff that like you and I spent a lot of time talking about, and stoicism, and some. I didn't. They didn't dig deep into stoicism, but like it seemed like they just felt like it was cool to toss the buzzword around. Like they didn't really know much about it. It seemed like, but it was like, well, it seems
Right.
like a cool thing to do. Everybody's talking about it, so we should just talk about Marcus Aurelius. And they just kind of threw it around as like a buzzword, cool thing to say in their discourse.
Yeah, totally. I mean, they use a lot of buzzwords, right, in the movie, or the characters do, and I think that's intentional by the filmmakers. Is that these guys are very much these tech bros who um, know the jargon and use it as almost like a shield. And yeah, they just throw around these, Aurelius and Stoic, Aurelius this, Stoic that, without any of the gravitas, right, of the actual philosophy. It's just they use it to justify their detachment, and they don't really engage with the actual teachings of Stoicism, which um, I'm hoping that that comes across, and not it's not just it doesn't come across as a dig on Stoicism, because I think obviously there's a lot of substance behind Stoicism, and they don't really dig into any of that. It's just there's these terms that they add on to all the various buzzwords that they use throughout the movie.
Yeah. Yeah. And like this example, as we were doing some research for this episode, we got a little assist here of like a really, I think, tangible example of how the characters in this movie were depicted. Was just imagine that they would launch an app, and essentially like we're focusing on stoicism, and like what would they do to create like an AI app version of stoicism. Like maybe they would call it something like stoic AI, right? And like you would see like how they would just bastardize an app like this, like an app that's designed to instill morality and seek wisdom, and to seek more questions than answers, and try to get to truth and like self-purpose and meaning. Like they would find a way to basically just build this into something that is like all about their own personal capital gains to drive an increase in their net worth. And what would this app have to do to get people hooked to it and engaging with it and drive more revenue for our product. And then they would still use the buzzword, but it's about stoicism, and Marcus Aurelius is like a really peaceful, mild mannered, like a really cool, chill dude. So that's okay. Like we'll just use his name as a way to make money in an ethical way. So I don't know. I thought, go ahead.
No, no, I was just gonna say, obviously we got this from full disclosure from ChatGPT. This was one of the suggestions, and I just think it's really funny, like the pitch it put together. So I'm just gonna read it just because it's really funny. Imagine you're trapped in a mountain lodge with four guys who all think they're Marcus Aurelius, but like with equity and Palantir. So here's the pitch one of them might make after a few too many soy flat white. Introducing Stoic AI, the only AI driven platform that helps you disrupt the world mindfully. Real time emotion suppression, ethics as a service, a built in Marcus Aurelius quote generator for your quarterly investor call. Launch weapon grades and misinformation? No problem. Our calm mode ensures your heart rate stays under 60 beats per minute. Because inner peace isn't just for monks, it's for moguls who may or may not be causing global collapse. Stoic AI, feel nothing, grow everything. I think that's freaking hilarious.
The tagline is insane. Feel nothing, grow everything. I mean, that's hilarious. So good.
Yeah.
No, that was a really, like, hilarious output. I mean, it just totally defines them, though. I mean, it was exactly what they would have done. It was the kind of mindset that they were definitely trying to convey.
Yeah, and that reminds me, we haven't even talked about the obvious reference in the title, which is, obviously the title is Mountainhead, but it's a clear reference to Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. And it's interesting because I think there are some elements of objectivism, which is a philosophy that Ayn Rand prescribes or subscribes to, compared to Stoicism. There's like kind of emotional detachment. But while I think Stoicism is meant as a philosophy to look inward, I think objectivism is very much about the outside world and how you interact with the outside world. So there's like that whole pick up yourself from the bootstraps, and self reliance, which they kind of share, right? Like Stoicism and objectivism, but there are some very clear differences in terms of empathy and compassion that are from my perspective, very different in the two philosophies.
Yeah. I mean, I remember, like first learning about Ayn Rand and reading Atlas Shrugged and then Fountainhead and thinking like, wow, this is a lot. And you can understand, this was, I mean, obviously written in a bit in protest of communism and like, the world that Ayn Rand grew up in. But at the same time, like when you see the current events happening and you see that there is this possibility, like the movie shows, that there are people powerful enough now that could impact the future of humanity and the future of civilization the way that Ayn Rand's books used to say. Like, it seems such a far-fetched fictional thing that power was so distributed in the world that it was impossible. But now you're looking at, I mean, at least maybe from a more of an American-centric point of view, that there are like our base AI models being created by like maybe a handful of American like leaders, and the future is not as distributed because anything that is going to be built on top of those AI models are going to be built using the base models that many of these tech leaders have the like responsibility to develop and code and build, and they are making decisions every day on how fast to go, how slow to go, what's safe, what's not safe, and where to focus effort and energy to ensure that we are either winning in the race to develop AGI, or that we are doing it in a safe way, and they have to find that right balance. And I don't know what is going to be the right mix of both of those. I don't know that we're having enough conversation to influence what those choices are going to be outside of the individual decisions of maybe a handful or a few dozen people that get to influence how those decisions are made. So yeah, I don't know, I think it's been a very interesting correlation, or like the interesting reference of Mountainhead, because I guess it was all on a mountain, to Ayn Rand's Fountainhead. But it is kind of insane to think that we live in a world where there are individuals with as much power as, I would say, these executives that are running our large language model AI tech companies have.
Yeah, yeah, it's a really interesting comparison, and telling that they use that as the title of the movie. But I mean, you talked a little bit about kind of like the power imbalance, or the perceived power imbalance. I mean, we don't know for sure, but where do you think the zeitgeist is on AI? Like, obviously, this movie has a very particular point of view that I think you could argue leans pessimistic. But where do you think the general public is on optimistic versus pessimistic on AI?
Man, I guess my first reaction would be ignorant, maybe in too crass of a
Mm,
way. I think that we don't have enough people in the discussion. So I guess my first response would be that we need, I think, more awareness and more engagement from a broader, diverse set of people to get to a good collective decision. And then I guess, it's a great question. I honestly feel like there might be a pretty good split of optimists and pessimists. I mean, I would feel that the optimists are going to be those that are, really like working in the industry, those that are using the tools, very frequently, and not just using it, but like helping to build and shape and like building an ecosystem of entrepreneurial ventures and companies in that ecosystem. And then I think for those that are maybe more pessimistic, it's we're working perhaps in industries that see jobs going away, that see that, hey, what am I going to do for a living? That see children that are graduating college and don't have entry level jobs. And like, what is the economy going to be like in terms of generating an income? Will jobs even be a thing in the future? I think the zeitgeist probably is leaning more pessimistic, I would have to
Yeah.
guess, because of just the sheer amount of uncertainty that AI brings. And I think that the pessimism is going to be more concentrated in folks that are helping to build the future.
Yeah, no, that's a really great point. I think it's different perspectives, like you said. It's the people building it versus the people being affected by it. Just as you were saying that, it reminded me of one quote from the movie, which I thought was interesting. I think it was Venn, who said, "Do you know what happened when they showed the first movie uh, to an audience? People ran screaming from the theater because they thought a train was coming at them. What was the response? Not make less movies, but make more movies. So obviously, it was an argument for less regulation, right? Like do more of the thing, which could be irresponsible. But I thought it was an interesting perspective, and I think one of the most compelling arguments I'm reading about in Super Agency from Reid Hoffman is that everything that the industry is doing is maybe not fully public, but it's iterative, right? So OpenAI is releasing versions constantly, and so is Claude, so is Anthropic, so is Google. So all the companies are constantly releasing new versions to leapfrog one another. And so what this accomplishes is that there's constant public scrutiny, right? If there's something wrong with the model, we'll very quickly find out because OpenAI has what, like over 100 million users or it had 100 million users in the first 5 days, I think, when it was released. So who
Mhm.
knows how many users it has now? But I thought that was a pretty compelling argument that this is all happening iteratively. And if there's something, if we start veering towards the wrong path, that will be quickly discovered and righted, hopefully, right? And maybe that's a little bit naive, but I like to think that, yeah, like there's no this Pandora's box is open. There's no going back to, we can't just make it go away. So I like to think that that's the right way to think about it. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So let's at least break it up into two parts, because I think one part is the development and the speed with which AI is being developed and the capabilities that it can provide. And I think the other is how thoughtful we are being with the long term viability of our citizens and humanity at large. And I think both of those, there's different like excitement or pessimism on both of those points. So I get your point about the transparency and openness with which these models are being released to the public. I guess there is also a certain level of research that's happening within the labs before you feel comfortable for it to become generally available. So, what is it that is happening in the labs that are still being trained? And what are the edges that are being pushed in secret before there is the fully released version? Meaning, how much visibility do we really have into how advanced these AI models are? And usually you'll get some leaks. And where, if I look at kind of the fundamental concern that I have, is that I don't know enough about how the large language models are being trained to be able to say, when is it just going to predict that when I start typing, THAN, that it's going to say, okay, thank you, and then put a comma and put my signature at the end of an email, to the point where it's going to say, oh, that last sentence you wrote, I know that you're no longer going to write anymore, and just auto populates thank you, like we're done. And it's accurate all the time. And then it gets to the point where it's like, it reads an email and it knows exactly how I'm going to respond and writes the whole email for me. And then it gets to the point where it's like, I don't even need to manage my inbox because I have my own bot that's doing all my responses better than I can do it. And next thing I know, it's like, well, holy cow, this is really freaky and really weird. Like, I don't know how quickly that happens, because
Yeah, yeah.
there is that happening in the lab, and we don't know what that delta is. And maybe it's like, to Reed's point, like maybe it's not as much as I think. Like maybe it is like, hand to mouth, but I don't know. That's the stuff that does worry me a little bit on that angle.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I guess it's the speed of progression that I think worries people. And taking your point to the next kind of logical step, right? You have a bot responding to all your emails. The person on the other end also has bots responding to all their emails. So what do we have? Just everyone just has their own bots. So all these bots are just talking to each other, and humans are not involved at all, right? Like, do we get to that point? And then
Yeah,
what's the point of email then?
exactly. Look, I heard it really well the other day, um, and something I was reading was that, like, I guess AGI, artificial general intelligence, is where the intelligence of the algorithm or the, the agent that we create is, greater than that of a human, and that it has the ability to then, I guess, like, create its own backup data storage, like, create a safeguard so that it can never be shut off. Like, those are the type, I mean, I know it sounds like sci-fi, but I mean, and of course, if we're thinking about this, I'm sure these developers are trying to find ways to ensure none of that happens. But, like, it's also like trying to tell a developer and a coder to, like, QA their own code. Like, that's why we have separate QA teams from, development teams, because, it's hard for you to QA your own stuff. I don't know. I know, like, Sam Altman has said they have red teams and blue teams, and they do all this edge case testing to make sure everything is being developed safely. But it's still like Sam Altman and OpenAI deciding what is safe and what's not safe. That's not another intermediary party that I would think would have a more representative opinion of what is safe and what's not safe, and not have a bias of, like, well, I got to get this next release out, or Gemini's going to eat our lunch, or Anthropic is going to get all of my business if I don't get this next feature out. Like, even in Reid Hoffman's case, it's hard for me to not think that there are risks being taken that I would not, as a citizen, want these companies to be taken, at the risk of harm to humans.
Yeah, absolutely true. And like, I don't know what the solution to that is, right? Like, that's capitalism, right? One company does something, the other company tries to outdo them, and off we go, right? That's the race. That's the rat race. That's capitalism. But in this case, it can have some really far-reaching, harmful results because of it. So it's a quandary, right? Maybe we have solutions in place where there aren't like strict guardrails in place necessarily, but maybe we require AI ethicists to be hired at these companies to oversee what's going on so that they can alert the community if someone's going too far. I don't know. Like, I don't know what the solution is. And
I
even
love
if
that idea. I love that
yeah,
idea though, bud. Like, I think that's a very rational, meaningful, like, first, seems like a basic step. Like, I love that idea, to be honest.
oh great. I mean, maybe they already have that, right? Like, I would hope that these companies have ethicists, AI ethicists on staff and looking at this stuff, but we don't know. And maybe that's a first step at least. The problem I see beyond that is, I don't know, is China going to have AI ethicists on their staffs? I don't know. I'm not so sure. Is Russia? Probably not. And maybe I'm generalizing, and that's not fair, but that's just my gut feeling that some of these countries are just not going to require something like that. So, and if that's the case, maybe does the U.S. fall behind, and do these countries, so, like, the global geopolitics in play here with some technology that's so far reaching, right?
No question about it, and not easy decisions to make, and the level of tension that exists around the world doesn't create an environment for collaboration on the responsible development of this technology. And in fact, there's probably more distrust now in international politics than, I don't know, maybe at any point in our lives. And so, like, we at some point had the political will, internationally, to sign the Paris Climate Accord, which was, when you really think about how instrumental and massive it is to get, international coalition, including China, to agree on a set of, conditions that everybody was going to adhere to reduce the risk of climate change, like I can't imagine us doing something like that for the responsible use of AI. Because I mean, even the Paris Accord now, U.S. opted out of, China opted out of, and people didn't stay compliant with what was even stipulated there. Like, we're not at a point where this is a race that is, I think, going to be collaborative. It seems like a race that's very much competitive, and not competitive in like a, tech bro way, but like competitive in like a, we're going to develop the nuclear bomb before you, like
Global
that.
domination. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, so
Exactly.
true. So true.
I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So, the other half of what I was also trying to tease apart, because I think we talked about like how do we develop this responsibly and safely. And then I was teeing up this other topic of where I think the pessimism comes in for the general population that may not be as like read up on what's happening within, the AI development race is what about the economic implications of this? And how are we prepared or not prepared for the economic ramifications of AI? What are they going to be? How pervasive are they going to be? How quickly should we be thinking about universal basic income? How quickly do jobs in general go away? What about currency? Like, there's so many economic implications that are probably even more complicated than dimensions of safe and responsible development of AI that we don't have the oxygen available to sort through because this shit is moving so fast. And that worries me in some cases more than the actual tech itself, right? Like you can convince me to be optimistic about the tech probably, but I struggle with being optimistic about the economic implications.
Yeah, I totally get that. I think I'm kind of of two minds of this, right? So if you look at all the other kind of transformational technologies throughout history, there's going to be some growing pains, right? But I think society eventually adjusts, and the jobs that are phased out will be replaced by jobs that we can't even conceive of yet, right? That will exist in the future. And I think the optimistic view is that society will adjust, will find other ways to, just because the computer was, or just because the calculator was invented, didn't mean we stopped doing math, right? Like examples like that, printing press. Like you can go back and look at all the kind of transformational technologies that were introduced. The difference, I think, in this case is scale and speed, right? Because I mean, look at what's it been, 2.5 years roughly since ChatGPT was made public. I mean, AI has been around for a couple of decades, but ChatGPT is really the inflection point, right? Because it made public what was kind of happening behind the scenes for so long, and everyone kind of saw it firsthand. So I guess look at the progress is my point from that no what was it, November 2023, something like that, to now, and look at the progress that's been made. It's just completely mind-blowing, right? I mean, and then think about, and it's only accelerating. It's not like, I think it's almost like a logarithmic scale, right? It's not a exponential scale. It's like a logarithmic scale. Like it just keeps getting better and better at a much faster pace. So that I think is a big difference. Can we, as a society, adjust fast enough? And I don't know. That's you're right. That's the part of it that I think makes me a little pessimistic. And I think this whole conversation is then I talk myself from optimism to pessimism. But maybe we can end on a optimistic note. But yeah, I see where you're going with that though, because it's the scale and the speed that's scary.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, look, I mean, all right, like I'll play my own devil's advocate and try to get a little bit more optimistic, right? Like I am a huge fan of Lord of the Rings, and I consider myself to like really identify, like want to be a hobbit because they have the Shire and they live in the Shire and like nobody really works. They all tend to their gardens, like they write in books, they story tell, they eat, they party, they dance, like, and they just seem like the happiest group of people. And I was like, well, maybe AI can deliver that. Like maybe we don't work, like maybe we don't have jobs, maybe we don't have to worry about currency and we all can just be hobbits living in the Shire. I don't know, man. That's the optimistic view here. I
Yeah.
tend to agree with you 1,000,000% that can be a like idealistic destination, but that the path to get to, being a hobbit in the Shire will be through, I think, material conflict. Unfortunately, not to be like too alarming. I don't think I'm really going out on a limb to say that, but I do think, unfortunately, there will be a. I mean, it seems like we're headed towards it. I hope we can resolve things peacefully, but we are, it's seemingly more and more headed towards some type of a conflict, and that, through all of that, I guess, I mean, unnecessary friction and tension, we'll have some, time to cool down and, come up with a scalable way that, we can exist as humans in an economy that is supported and built off of AI. There's no question that I want America to win the AI race, and like want our tech, founders to, to build and develop AI in a safe and responsible way, while still ensuring that, we do win the AI race. But I also believe that the democratic approach and like having a healthy democracy is going to be critical for us to then be winners in the long run. And so I think, what we can do as citizens is focus on fixing democracy, let the tech bros continue to build AI. And if those two worlds converge in a healthy way, I think, we can come through this kind of period of chaos and rapid development and, come out happier on the other side.
Yeah, yeah, so true. I love that analogy with or reference to Lord of the Rings. It's fantastic. And actually, as you were saying that, I'll throw another reference in there. Star Trek. I'm a big Star Trek fan. In the history of, like, the future history of Star Trek, they had to go through a kind of global war before they got to their kind of um, what do you call it? Like idealistic kind of utopian society in the future. And so I'm hoping that it doesn't come to that. That's a little extreme, but I think I'm hopeful that we can get to a future, like you said, that if we can balance the kind of risks of AI, and make sure we're doing it in a responsible way, that we can get there one day.
Yeah, no, I agree, man. I mean, it's interesting that, so much of the different, characteristics and traits of people, of humans, that have been weaved through religious literature, through fictional literature, and like world history, all like converge on us, and we try to learn from those lessons throughout history to prevent it from repeating itself. And we sit in such a different iteration that, I mean, I don't know, perhaps existential, I don't know, but it's certainly maybe one of the most transformative technologies in maybe like human civilization. I don't know that that's an understatement. I mean, I don't think that's an overstatement. I mean, you cited a bunch of them, like, the printing press and, the automobile and, the assembly line and, like, airplanes, and all of that were no question revolutionary. But I don't know. I feel like what we're seeing now is definitely so transformative, and again, the pace is definitely so disruptive that it takes level heads, right? It takes like a hobbit mindset to prevent people seeking the ring of power from being corrupted by that power. Even if we all just took lessons from Lord of the Rings, that's my pitch, Chirag, is everybody go read Lord of the Rings and try to be a hobbit and not a human, and that's how we get out of this. That's my pitch, and I'll stick to it.
That is fantastic. I think we should definitely end on that. Let's all be hobbits.
Here, I'll end it on this quote. How about this? Since we do the quote things, right? So here, this is an exchange between Frodo and Gandalf. And if you don't know the characters, go read Lord of the Rings. So Frodo says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." Gandalf says, "So do I, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what do we do with the time that is given to."
Fantastic.
All
I
right,
think that was in the movie as well, but yeah,
that was, yeah,
yeah, yeah, that's right. Now it
cool,
makes me
man.
want to go back and watch Lord of the Rings again. And those movies are fantastic.
Yeah, right. Those were really good stuff. Great books, good movies.
Yeah.
Great pod. Good episode,
All
my friend.
right. Good episode. Until next time.
All right. We'll see y'all next time.
See you
Cheers.
next time. That's the pod. Take care.
Later.
Bye.
Bye.